Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. Today was day 24 of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings, and we had our first look at a staff sergeant, one of the commanders involved in the response to the mass casualty events. We've been hearing so far over the previous 23 days, most days from or about constables and corporals that were involved in the response. But today it was Steve Halliday, Staff Sergeant Steve Halliday, who was on the stand. And there was also a foundational document presentation that dealt with command decisions. So it was interesting, the procedural question. First of all, without admitting so, or without saying so, certainly, the Mass Casualty Commission seems to be taking some of the advice or criticism that they've been receiving from me and others about their procedures. The foundational document presentation today was very short. It was just about 20 minutes long. It was 15 minutes yesterday. And it was dealing with a document that was 321 pages long on command decisions. So, as I had recommended previously, instead of making these foundational documents and suggesting that they would be sufficient instead of hearing testimony and instead of witnesses, now they're properly, I think, or more properly, I should say, using them as sort of background or foundations for the questions of witnesses. So, instead of going through 100 different documents or possibly more to reference things, or it's all compiled in one spot. So when somebody's asking questions of the witness, they can refer to the foundational document, occasionally to the source documents from which those foundational documents are created. So anyway, that seems to be a positive thing. We spent much more of the time today hearing from Steve Halliday, who was there in a supervisory capacity as a staff sergeant. He wasn't the incident commander. Now, that was Staff Sergeant Jeff West, who we'll hear from tomorrow. The critical incident commander was his title or his role that night. Staff Sergeant Halliday was more of there in a supportive role to make sure that if certain resources were needed, that somebody was tasked with arranging for those resources to happen. So, so he directed people. Well, he tried to arrange for a helicopter. He tried to, make sure vehicles were accounted for, police vehicles, that is. Delegated the task of containing the Portapique area. Of course, many mistakes were made, but listening to Staff Sergeant Halliday today certainly gave the impression that he was, moving the pieces around as a supervisor should do, although not without some mistakes, some of which he seemed prepared to admit or accept, and others not so. So. Just a note on the leadership. So Staff Sergeant is a fairly high rank, but it's not the highest ranking officer in the Northeast Nova region, which covers Colchester, Cumberland County, Truro, well, not Truro town, but outside of Truro, and all the way up through Pictou, Guysborough, and Ganesh, up into Cape Breton. And then there's another region that's Halifax, and then there's another, the Southwest region. So Staff Sergeant Halliday was sort of the number 2 officer. The superintendent, who's above Staff Sergeant Halliday, Superintendent Thompson, never throughout the incident attended the command post that was set up. And then in addition to that, there's Nova Scotia-wide supervisors or inspectors, commanders, Mosier, Campbell, Leather, and Bergerman, who also had no involvement. So no direct operational involvement. It kind of harkens back to something that Corporal Tim Mills was saying yesterday, which is when you get beyond a certain level in the RCMP, it seems like you're more of a politician than a crime fighter. Not sure, paraphrasing what he said yesterday, but that's essentially it. Now, Staff Sergeant Halliday is not somebody who's unfamiliar to me. He was the sergeant here in Guysborough, where I am broadcasting from today, between 2005 and 2009, as he described today. I didn't know Steve. I didn't know him that well when he was here, although I met him and dealt with him several times in cases and in the community. He was, I know, very well liked here, played hockey with the guys, and was well regarded in the community as a leader, and I know everybody kind of knew that he was on his way up when he left here. He went from here to Pictou and then into his current role after that. He was the first witness. He mentioned that he started out in the Newfoundland Constabulary. He was the first witness I ever saw stand up to give evidence. You'll may not know this, but in Newfoundland, and I don't know if they still do this or not, but their practice had been to stand up as police officers when they gave evidence. And it seemed very strange, certainly as a lawyer asking questions to somebody who's also standing up, as the lawyer would be. But anyway, that was interesting. The other, just personal, not too personal note, he was involved. I had a client that was involved in a standoff. This was back in 2012. So after Staff Sergeant Halliday had moved on, but he was back involved in that case as the crisis negotiator. And there was some discussion today about crisis negotiation. And in the case that I'm referencing, there was like 11 hours of discussions between the officers and my client. He was a military veteran and liked to talk and all this sort of stuff. The strategy, as far as I can see, for crisis negotiation in those kind of circumstances is to talk as long as you can, keep the person on the phone, try to be nice to them, find some commonalities, just keep talking, and then every once in a while say, hey, wouldn't you like to come out? There doesn't seem to be anything very technical or insightful about the strategy. I'd be curious to know if that was according to plan or if that's just the way he was at that time. So just getting to his testimony today, Staff Sergeant Halliday, he's retired from the RCMP, but unlike Corporal Mills, who was also retired from the RCMP, I didn't get the impression that Staff Sergeant Halliday was there to bury the RCMP or to be overly critical of them in any real way. Although I would also say that it didn't seem like he was trying to protect anyone. If something wasn't done properly, he would say, well, I told so-and-so to do that. And then, I approved the tweet language at this time and it didn't go out until nearly a half an hour later. Is that disappointing? Yes. He answered truthfully. Yes, it was. So, he was, I say, not there to protect anybody except perhaps himself. I'm not sure. We'll see if the other officers contradict anything that he has said in as far as who he directed to do what. But it seemed like he would say, well, if I delegated this task on containment to this staff sergeant and or delegated communications to this person and seemed to be getting information and delegating as appropriate or as he felt appropriate. Now, one of the things that he mentioned right away, and he didn't seem afraid to mention things that didn't go well, like the helicopter, for example. He asked for the helicopter to be there. He thought it was a good idea for the infrared capabilities, be able to find somebody in the woods, all those things, that was a resource that should have been available and is a problem, and it wasn't. And they tried, but then the ERT, the ERT squad was on its way, so they stopped trying at some point and waited for them to use their resources. So he explained that was a disappointment, and of course that reflects back on the RCMP as a whole, if not himself as an individual. He also expressed how his initial suspicion was that maybe it was another sergeant, Dave Lilly, who may have been having a mental health crisis or something like this. That was dispelled immediately, but he didn't try to sugarcoat that or say anything different other than, yes, that's what I thought, and so I took action on it. I think that was probably the responsible thing to express at the time and do if he felt that was an issue. Ended up getting some valuable information from Sergeant Lilly, actually, as it turned out, that he was able to use later on. So he did have some ideas for improving the situation, and one was use of better technology. We find out through Staff Sergeant Halliday, we knew some of this already, that there was very poor mapping of the area and not great information as to the location of that access and potential exits, particularly, of course, this road through the blueberry field. There was one of the lessons that Staff Sergeant Halliday indicated was that pictometry, so better maps with some the layout of trails and much better topographical information, that would have been very helpful. They tried to access it at some point throughout the night and were unable to do so. It was really not until 4 a.m. when they used Google Maps, I believe he said, that they realized that there may have been this road back through the blueberry field. So it was another issue because some of the information of the blueberry field road, this was known by some of the lower level officers, but obviously didn't make it up to his level, or apparently didn't make it up to his level, I should say. Then they were using some very rudimentary, and in one case a hand-drawn map of the area to try to set up containment of the space. They really felt that Wortman was still in the zone, in the Portapique community. They had what Staff Sergeant Halliday called threat cues. So suspected gunfire. These were explosions that were taking place through the fires. So the explosions themselves, some flashing lights through from vehicles, and other unexplained sightings that unexplained at the time, and then seemingly newly lit fires, which were possibly newly lit, but also maybe more likely fires that had started but hadn't been noticed by anybody in the RCMP at that time until later. So, for example, Staff Sergeant Halliday did not know that Andrew MacDonald had said that there was a second exit when he was, first encountered the officers at the head of Portapique Beach Road. None of those things. They felt that it was a static situation that they could contain and find Wortman eventually within the woods area of Portapique. Of course, it didn't happen. And it wasn't until, from the supervisory level, until Lisa Banfield emerged, that they say they learned more detail about the vehicles, and so they directed the ERT squad to check the cars again inside to see if, they had accounted for all of the Ford Tauruses, Ford Tauri that Wortman had purchased. Thought he had 3, and turns out he had 4. So at least 4. So that was he was trying to explain why they weren't looking in any other places or making better efforts to contain the scene. When the morning comes and they realize that there's an incident, in another direction, away from Portapique, that the killer has escaped, then there's some consideration to communicating that to the public. And Staff Sergeant Halliday in his statement had mentioned that he had some concerns over panicking the public, or that they would have a panic reaction. Of course, we heard last week from many of the emergency management experts that such a panic doesn't typically occur. It seems that the RCMP was not really prepared to communicate with the public. First of all, Staff Sergeant Halliday, who's at that level, and you would think, communicates with the public quite often, was not trained in emergency response public communications, how to use, what should be done on certain platforms, which platforms to use, all of those things. He had really no idea. He was completely unfamiliar with the Alert Ready system. So all of those things were sort of in the mix. And he was asked whether his concern over letting the public know and creating chaos or panic was given priority over letting the public know and having their safety in mind. He said that he thought they correctly balanced the concerns, and he still thinks that. He thought that at the time and didn't express any contrition over that. Didn't express any regret over the balancing act that decision entailed at the time. So that was interesting too, because like I said earlier, unlike Tim Mills yesterday, or like Tim Mills, he is retired, seemingly maybe not completely free, but certainly free to say his opinion, and didn't express any contrition in that regard over the lack of earlier public communication or use of the emergency alert system. So I'll just mention a little bit of about the cross-examination. That was some of the highlights, I think, from Staff Sergeant Halliday's direct examination. Cross-examination occurred. Again, there were 3 lawyers questioning today: Sandra McCullough from Patterson Law, Josh Bryson from Chester Law, and Tara Miller from MDW Law in Halifax. All asked questions. Again, no questions from the federal government lawyers. The Department of Justice lawyers are there. You would think they may have some questions for a police officer who's testifying at the public inquiry, but they did not. I thought it was a positive that 3 lawyers had a chance to ask questions, although it wasn't all of the questions. They weren't asking all their own questions. Tara Miller indicated when she started, and she was the last of the 3 to go, that she was asking some for herself or for her own clients, but some for the other participants. So it's not completely unfettered cross-examination yet. It's still under control of the commission to an unreasonable extent, but it's inching along the way to a better place. That's I guess as far as I'll go with that. So with his cross-examination with Tara Miller, who always does a great job, Staff Sergeant Halliday did confirm his concern that it would be dangerous to issue public alerts. Although, in fairness to Staff Sergeant Halliday, he wasn't directly responsible for issuing the content of messages. He had tasked somebody else, another staff sergeant, with that. But when that staff sergeant wasn't available, I can't remember if it was McCollum or one of the others, but when they weren't available, the message was sent to him, and he approved it right away. And yet it took almost another half an hour for that message to go out. So he did approve the tweet content when it got to him, and then it still took a long time, and two people died. Heather O'Brien and Kristen Beaton died during that intervening time between when the tweet was approved and when it was issued. Anybody that's on Twitter knows, once you know what you're going to say, it takes very little time to post it. So I'm not sure what that delay may have been, why that delay may have occurred. This doesn't seem to be a good reason for it. Anyway, those are my thoughts on day 24, our first introduction to command decisions. It's a very long foundational document. I'm going to go through that and see some of the media reports and see if anything of significance has been left out. Tomorrow, we will hear from Staff Sergeant Jeff West, who was the critical commander at the time, operations commander. And we're going to hear from another Staff Sergeant, Kevin Surrett, as well. So Mr. Surrett, I think, came up from Yarmouth to take over command from Staff Sergeant West in the morning, and up until the mass casualty, well, up until the killer was killed himself. So, all right, that's it for day 24. Thanks for watching. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.